1% of the material.
So when you said that there was like certain basic institutions that just fell apart, what was this, like police, hospitals, like what was gone once the government?
Police was there, army was there. The hospitals were very functional. Hospitals were, I mean, it was unbelievable what they did. I mean, they performed surgeries those days. I remember that they had one particular, it was this particular hospital which is actually specialized in operating, doing surgery on trauma, surgery and everything. They started to operate those days, to have surgical interventions, and they had, in one of the first nights, they had soldiers defending the hospital. 4 of those soldiers have been wounded. Now I'm still thinking, and I have no idea who in the world was shooting in the hospital. Now, that doesn't make sense at all, because I don't really think it was the army. I mean, who had this interest? So there were cases when soldiers being right at the door of the hospital was wounded and right moved in the surgery room. One of the soldiers was particularly famous because he got one of these bullets went through the foot, and he had a sequence of surgeries. By the end, the last surgery was performed in Italy a few months later. And he gave an interview to the TV, and I've seen him, and it was really a freak accident. He was really shot defending a hospital. And this is, again, I don't know who shot. I don't think it makes any sense to believe that it was the army or friendly fire. The incident was classified as friendly fire. But who would have the political interest to do that? It doesn't really make sense. Yeah, so it's a complicated. No, I can only see state questions, and I wish I knew a few of these answers.
Did the Soviets prop up the country economically? So once the Soviets pulled out their influence, was there an economic downturn in Romania? Or was it pretty self-sufficient?
No, I don't think it was self-sufficient, but I don't think the Soviet economy was so much connected to the local economy as is, for example, as it was for Cuba, for other nations.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it was an interest from the local politicians to have as many contacts with other parts of the world, including the Arab world or the Western Europe. So it wasn't really dependent. There was after I believe 1965, 1968, there was a certain interest, motivated politically and economically, to be less dependent of the Soviets. So they were not really dependent of the perestroika after 85.
Okay.
So it wasn't, it had a very strange economical equation if you look. Because for Romania, I believe they borrowed a lot of money. We're talking about 20 billion in the 70s from the International Monetary Fund. And the communists managed to pay everything until March '89. It's kind of a unique case.
Mm-hmm.
The idea was to develop the local industry and to put the whole country on the at a different modernity level. What actually happened is that in '89 parts of industry were not that competitive because they were done in the 70s and frozen at that level. There was an economical problem, serious economical problem, when you have components of the industry which is completely unreliable in economical terms. But they were not really connected to the Soviet market.
But during the Soviet influence, could you feel for '89 you were oppressed, that there's no freedoms, and then after that there's freedoms, or what was the transition like? I mean, what was...
It was like this.
When you're 19 and when you're 21,
yeah.
What was the difference? Like, they wanted these guys out of here, go hang them and shoot them and start over?
Are we talking about the communists in general, or are we talking about the Soviets?
We're talking about Romania before '89.
Okay.
How was your life compared to after '89?
So here we have to discuss in stages. We have to see that the answer is in 2 levels.
Okay.
First, it's in terms of the Communist Party. I'm going to have to repeat these numbers again. In 1944, there were only 800 Romanian communists. This is the smallest thing you can imagine. As soon as the Soviet army comes and takes over, in a couple of years you have 1 million communists.
What year was that?
46 or 47.
Okay.
They had to kick them out because they were applying like crazy to become members of the Communist Party.
Right.
Why would they do that?
Because they want to be part of the group.
Yeah, that tells you a lot. Now, in December 87, you have about 3.8 million members of the Communist Party. A few days later, nobody would declare communist,
Right.
himself as communist.
Right.
Let's look at the statistics. I mean,
Like
and I honestly, I don't know anybody who was really a true believer.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe they were, but I never met them. I believe I've seen somebody, I've seen an old professor of political science who, I believe he was left from a different stage of development of humanity, but besides him, I haven't, really,
Right.
yeah, so it's, I
So
don't
all
know,
these
maybe
fake
that people who
communists
believe in
are-
communism, I believe, so I respect that, but, I
Right.
had a chance to meet, yeah.
Go with the program.
So I would say, it's, they're saying, by the way, there's, I have to tell you that the top 10 reasons to be a Romanian. There's this faculty in Western Ontario, I believe in Kalina Mihailescu, who wrote top 10 reasons. And one of them is like this. The war is not supposed to end until you try both sides. I'm just describing you this in statistical terms.
Uh-huh.
And there is another one which says something like this. If Russia has a border with God, you have a border with Russia. There are a lot of things that, it's... so there was the first period, there was a period of international communism between 1944 and 1965, or 64 rather. And then from that, for a while Romania was under Soviet occupation until, I believe, 1956. And indeed the feeling was, okay, when are these guys going to leave?
Mm-hmm.
And they left. And then it was just an internal matter. After 65, between 65 and 89, Romania is like a standard example of national communism.
Okay.
Which means that, the party has a particular ideology, which is not the international ideology like in Fidel Castro's argument, okay, we have to defend the workers in Angola, let's send our army there. No, it's not that. It's that one like, okay, let's close the gate and let's try to be as self-sufficient as possible. Okay, we don't want to work with the Soviets, let's don't trust them, let's borrow from the West, let's develop our industry. Okay, these cars, Soviets are selling cars in Algeria and in Zaire. Let's do cheaper cars and let's take out the Soviet from those markets. They're going to be upset. Okay, that's fine. They did that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there was any kind of feeling against somebody, it was perhaps against the communist government of Romania, managed by Romanians, and about this the way of managing things as it was done there. It was very frozen, very slow-moving, very closed in every possible way. I mean, there was no feedback whatsoever from the real economy toward the administration. Nothing would change. It was very frozen. You couldn't see, I mean, now I can see it, but at that time I had the feeling that nothing will ever change. This is the feeling I had before revolution, like, okay, this is going to be like this forever.
Mm-hmm.
And when it changed, I couldn't believe it. It's something that happened in 24 hours, maybe less. And then that feeling, for many years you have this feeling of insecurity, like, what's going to happen next?
Mm-hmm.
I remember I said, if I hear one more time this sound, you turn on the TV and breaking news. Something new happened. I don't want to hear that. Give me anything else, any other song. Especially when they interrupt soccer games. Yes, please.
You described, you were talking about transition, and you said that for Romanians, transitions is a period of time that's changed, and you said, I don't know, I don't think there's a term, that term relates in English or for America. Can you explain that further?
Yeah.
Why you think that Americans don't understand transition?
No, they do understand. As soon as you look at the institutions, they understand 100%. The only problem is what word is the correct word. Because, depends who you read. There are some authors who are saying, the transition was just the period from the constitutional standpoint since the moment when one constitution was vanished and the new constitution kicked in. That's it. That's the transition. But there are some other authors who are saying, no, you have to look from the economical standpoint. since the moment when you had 100% state economy till you have a certain percent of privately owned economy, and the transition is the period you need to move to perform this transformation. So it depends who you read. Now, if you ask me, I mean, how much time are you going to need to go over this shock, the shock of that change, until you will see that you know, the economy and the society are well defined, well settled? I believe that this is a matter of decades. And I'm praying hard I'm wrong, at least in what concerns the more recent events. But it takes you decades, really, to go over that. Even the suspicion like, aha, you have violated the Constitution. I mean, you don't really hear that in a place that has a 200 years old Constitution. I mean, the rules are clear and nobody does that. I believe actually that for even smaller things, somebody can be removed from office. But there, I mean, the accusation, you are not playing, observing the rules. There's something very common. And this is a sign of that shock. But as soon as you look at the details, this can be really understood. And I'm feeling like my experience was, I was the subject of some unwanted experiment of history. So now we can learn and we can appreciate what actually happened, and it should never happen again, if possible. That's the way I view it. And I think every class that you had on constitutional law or something prepares you to understand every little thing you had. Now I should say that the most interesting thing about Romania was that and I think here I'm getting closer to the possible solution. How much time does a society need to have in place a system of balance and checks? That's something that's actually the most difficult thing to have. Either you have it written from the first attempt, and that's a stroke of genius if you can write a document that works from the first attempt. And then, how many years does it take until everybody will actually do what they're supposed to do within that document? Well, actually the process for Romania was successful, at least in the desire of the whole society to join the European Union. And as soon as they had these periodic reports from the European Union, and they were covering from the customs to the way that the courts of law were acting and were observing the laws and the procedures. All these reports were extremely beneficial because they had annual reports and they were telling them, you know what, you're not observing your own laws. That helped. But it took like how many years? At least 10 years. First they had to enter into negotiations with the European Union to be accepted to this negotiation. Then they had to observe some rules. That took a lot of time. Now, there are some countries for which this worked because, Romania is a member of the European Union now. What if you are in another place where you don't have this mechanism to come in? And there was no tradition in that culture whatsoever of any kind of balance. The only tradition there was in that place was maybe a voice. The president or the king or whatever was in the top of them. And that was the only mechanism they ever knew. If that was, the local culture is supposed to come up with a mechanism of this kind. How much time does it take? How much time needed, Europe to come up with such mechanism? That's the sad part of the answer. So I believe that, in Romania maybe the things have been was speeding up due to this process of European integration, and not the whole process. I wouldn't say it was perfect, because there are still problems, but that really helped. I mean, when you have an experienced representative from Germany or from UK coming in and writing this report and telling them what they have to do, they are not happy when they hear it, but then they have to observe it.